You know how some people say, don't do anything for yourself on the earth, but just worry about storing up treasures in the heavens because that's what Christ says. So like they say, don't bother to get rich. Don't bother to better yourself on the earth with material things because you know those are earthly things. Those are demonic things. Those are bad things. Just store up treasure for yourself in heaven. And of course, this is what Christ said. So they, I mean, this it sounds true. Well, in Proverbs 27, verse 23 through 27. Now, I was doing research about something else. Okay, well, let me read this scripture to you from Proverbs, chapter 27, verse 23 through 27. This is Solomon speaking, and he says, "You should well know the appearance of your flock. Take good care of your sheep, for wealth does not last forever, nor a crown for all generations. The green grass disappears, new grass appears, and the vegetation of the mountains is gathered in. The young rams provide your clothing, and the male goats provide the price of a field. And there will be enough goat's milk to feed you, to feed your household, and to sustain your servant girls." So, what Solomon is speaking about here is you should take care of your inheritance, of your possessions, of your material things. You should take care of it because these things will not last forever. So notice he mentions your sheep. Back then, your wealth was based on the amount of flock you had, your land space, right? And with these things, you can provide clothing for yourself. You can provide food for yourself when you slaughter a sheep and eat. You make your stew, you make your bread, right? You take care of your field. You take care of these things because if you don't take care of them, they're gonna vanish from you. Right? If you don't take care of your sheep, you're not always going to have sheep just because you had sheep to begin with. He's saying take care of them because just because you have sheep today doesn't mean you're always going to have it. No, you're not going to always have it if you don't, unless you take care of them. Right? So he says you should know well the appearance of your flock. You should take care of your sheep because these things will not last forever. Right? Because these things, they come and they go. But if you do take care of them, then you'll be able to have enough goat's milk to feed you, to feed your household, and to sustain your servant girls, right? Your servants. Okay. Now, there are many passages where Solomon speaks about taking care of your material things. But in the end, he gives the final conclusion of the matter, which I'm going to speak of at the end of this audio. So now, I know this passage already. But as I was doing my research, the question came in my mind about where Christ was speaking about the foolish man who was doing this exact same thing that Solomon is saying you should do. Right? There was a man who, in his parable, in Christ's parable, he spoke about a man who was basically taking care of his field and taking care of his sheep, basically, right? Quote unquote. But God called him a fool. And I was like, wait, so the question came in my mind. I'm like, wait, so is Christ contradicting what Solomon said that we should do because, wealth does not last forever? So I went to that passage to read it again, to try to understand the context, because I knew, obviously, Christ is not going to contradict Solomon. So I went to the scripture in Luke 12, verse 13 through 21. And then it starts off by saying, someone in the crowd said to him, that is Christ, and he said, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Right? So obviously this man has an inheritance and his brother doesn't want to give him part of the inheritance that's basically owed him. Right? And then Christ replied, he said, "Friend, who made me a judge over you to decide such things as these?" Right? I'm not your judge. I'm not going to decide or tell your brother to give you to divide the inheritance with you. Basically, he's saying, I didn't come here for that, right? And then Christ said to them, "Beware, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." Then he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store all my crops." Then he said to himself, I know what I'll do. I'll tear down my old barns and build bigger new ones. Then I'll have enough room to store all my wheat and other goods. Then I will say to myself, you have plenty of good things laid up for yourself for many years. Take it easy. Eat, drink, and be merry, right? Or be happy. So let's pause there. What this man is doing is a good thing, right? There's nothing bad. I mean, if the man has an abundance and he wants to build storage to hold all the abundance so that he will save it for the future, that's a good thing. That's what Solomon will tell you to do. Because if you're saying that this man should if he's having an overabundance of things, he should just give it away to people so that other people can enjoy it too, right? Well, Solomon would advise against that, because if you do that, you will lose your abundance. It's good to store your abundance because you will not always have them forever, right? So this is a good thing to do. Solomon is saying, take good care of your sheep to the point where you know how they look. If they're diseased, if they need more water, if they need more pasturage, better green land to eat from, right? Because these things will not last forever. So Solomon is saying, take care of, if you have to build bigger things to take care of your sheep, whatever you have to do to take care of what you have, do it. Because if you don't, well, it's going to be lost, because they're not, just because you have it in the beginning doesn't mean it's always going to be with you. You have to take care of it, because if you don't take care of it, they won't be there to take care of you, right? So in this parable, the man, it says that the ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundance of harvest. And he thought to himself, what shall I do, since I have no place to store my crops? Then he said, okay, I know what I'll do. I'll tear down these old barns that I have and I'll build bigger ones so that I can store enough wheat for myself, and then I won't have to bother too much in the future because I'll have many things laid up for myself. So that's like you have a lot of money and you're going to save your money in a bank, right? You're not going to spend it and give away your money to people just because you have an overabundance. If you do that, then you're going to lose your wealth, because your wealth will not last forever, like Solomon said, right? So what this man is doing is wise. So that's the questions that I had. I'm like, wait, so is Christ contradicting Solomon? Well, let's keep reading. But God said to him, you fool, you will die this very night. Then who will get everything you worked for? Right? Let me start back again. So Christ is giving the parable and he says, the ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, I know what I'll do. I'll tear down my old barns and build bigger new ones. Then I'll have enough room to store all my wheat and other goods. Then I'll say to myself, you have plenty of good things laid up for yourself for many years. Take it easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, you will die this very night. Then who will get everything you've worked for? Right? Because you're not going to be the one to enjoy it, because you're going to be dead this very night. So all this work you've done is vanity, right? And then Christ continues, this is how it will be for whoever stores up for themselves treasures on earth, but is not rich towards God. The New Living Translation says, yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God. The English Standard Version says, so is the one who lays up treasure for himself, but is not rich towards God. So this is not a contradiction of what Solomon said, because Solomon concluded, he said the end of everything being considered is fear the true God and keep his commandments. If you do that, everything else that you do won't necessarily be vanity, but it will be vanity if you have not put God first. Like Christ said, put God first and all these other things will be added to you, right? So what Christ is saying is that this rich man who had an abundance of crops, an overabundance of crops, there was nothing wrong in his thinking that he should build bigger barns to store his treasure for the future. No, there is nothing wrong with that. That's an intelligent thing to do. God gave us intelligence. What an intelligent person would do is exactly that. But where this rich man went wrong was he obviously was not rich towards God. He did not care about God. He stored up no treasures with God. So he's poor with God. So basically everything he's done is vanity. But now if the man had been rich towards God, who knows if God would have kept him alive so that he would be able to enjoy these things that he stored up for himself. Why? Because he made sure that his relationship with God was first and foremost. So now everything else that he has is just secondary. And so God, who knows if God would just keep him alive to enjoy these overabundance that he's come to, accumulate. So when Solomon says, take good care of your sheep, for wealth does not last forever, nor a crown for all generations. This is good advice for someone who has already made God a priority. But if a person has not made God a priority and he's taking good care of his sheep because his wealth will not last forever, well, yeah, it won't last forever. But because he hasn't put God first, everything he does will be vanity. He might be able to take care of his female servants. He might be able to take care of his family. He might be able to take care of the poor people even. But if he's taking care of the poor, that is in a way storing up treasures for yourself in heaven, because God loves people who take care of poor people, widows, and orphans. God, Jehovah, is a God of the fatherless and of widows, right? And of orphans and the poor. So if you're doing that, you are storing treasures for yourself in heaven. But if you're just taking care of your own people, right? If you're just taking care of yourself and your family, near close relatives and people you love, that's not a good deed. That's just really a selfish deed, because that's what you want to do anyway, right? When you take care of those you love, you feel good. So it's actually a selfish thing to do. But if you have not stored treasures for yourself in heaven, then all these things are vanity. So I remember moments before I started my research, coincidentally, I was thinking about different people who are rich and who have become rich because of things that they've done for society. You have people who've invented the air conditioner, right? So that we don't die when a heat wave comes, and elderly people don't die when the heat wave comes. You have people who have invented things that have made dirty water clean. You have people who have invented electricity. They've invented things that have added to the benefit and the betterment of humanity, right? People who invented the internet, and all these positive things, they're good. But if everybody in the world thought that, oh, don't worry about earthly things, just worry about heavenly things. Don't try to be rich now. Don't try to invent things. No, don't worry about that, because that's being materialistic. Don't try to be rich and invent things that will better people or put money in your pocket, right? It will put money in your pocket, but also make things better for all of humanity. No, don't worry about that, right? Just store up treasures for yourself in heaven. Well, if people took that short-sighted and short-minded mentality, you know how many people would be suffering today if people didn't work towards their passions, right? If we didn't have musicians, life would be so dull, right? If we didn't have people who were like artists and who manufacture different clothing and who made automobiles and planes, and all these things add to the betterment of humanity. They're not necessarily bad things. You can use them to do bad, but they're actually good things. If everybody thought like that only store up treasures for yourself in heaven and don't worry about anything on earth, then humanity would never progress. So there is nothing wrong in, following your passions, your dreams. If you want to invent something that would better people's lives, if you're saying, well, Armageddon's going to come soon, so I don't have to work. I don't have to try to feed the poor people in Africa. Let them suffer until Armageddon comes. Well, that's like Thomas said, if your brother is hungry, and you just tell him, well, go and let God be with you, what good have you done? Right? If you have the power to work and make money and increase your wealth and help the poor, isn't that better than saying, well, I'm only focusing on spiritual things. I'm not going to try to do anything else apart from that, where my brother would benefit from it and my poor brother would benefit from it, because, that's earthly things. That's materialistic thing. I'm not materialistic. No, well, Thomas will disagree with you on that. Solomon will disagree with you on that. And even Christ will disagree with you on that. The problem is not in these earthly materialistic things. The problem is what? When you do it and you don't put God first, when God is not your priority. But if you put God first, then anything else that you desire to do, well, go ahead and do it. As long as it's good, right, then it's good. And God will judge you in the end, just as Solomon said. Whatever your hand finds to do it with all your might, and do it as if you are doing it for God. But know that the true God will judge you for all these things in the end. But if you're doing good things, you're going to be judged for the righteous things you've done. But if you're doing it to create atomic bombs, well, obviously, you know that you will be judged for that too, and it won't be a good judgment. Right? So when you have Christians who say, don't pursue higher education and forsake that and be a poor person and be miserable and slave for Christ. Well, Solomon wasn't a miserable man, right? You have many people who've lived their life in good ways and will still be resurrected to paradise. And you have those who forsook their passions, right, and put God first. Okay, you have two different people. You have a person who put God first, and you have another person who put God first. But the first person, he put God first, and he also pursued his passions, and he lived his life. He lived a good life. He enjoyed good food. He still preached, right, but he still enjoyed good things like Solomon did. And God gave Solomon everything that he had. So obviously there's nothing wrong with being rich and having an overabundance of gold and so much food that you can't even finish all of it. Like, you do know how much God blessed Solomon, right? So obviously if Solomon can have that, you can have it too. But as long as you put God first. And then you have the second person who put God first, but he decided to forsake the earthly things, right? Which are not demonic, they're not bad. God created gold. He created food. He created women. He created animals, right? So these things are not bad. It's only if you become greedy with it, then it becomes a sin to you, right? So you have the second person who put God first, but decided maybe he misinterpreted what the Bible said, and he thinks that if he tries to strive to make his life better in the world, it's bad. Well, God isn't going to tell you if you're right or wrong. It's up to you. If you want to be foolish and think that that's what God requires of you, then go ahead and be foolish and think that that's what God requires of you. But the wise person who's read and studied God's word, who knows the principle of the matter, will know that, okay, no, God doesn't require me to be poor. Again, I'll refer to Solomon because God didn't make Solomon poor, right? So God doesn't require me to be poor. All he requires of me is to keep his commandments, to put him first, to love him with all my heart, my soul, my mind, strength, body, everything. And then whatever else I want to pursue, I have the right, the God-given authority to do it, right? And he enjoyed his life. Now, the first guy enjoyed his life, put God first. He'll be resurrected to paradise. The second person, he put God first, but he forsook earthly things because he thought it was a sin, so he forsook it. Well, he's also going to be resurrected to paradise, and then both are going to enjoy life in paradise. But one person suffered now when they didn't need to, and the other person didn't suffer. Why? Because one understood the Bible and the other one was a fool and did not understand the Bible and did not understand the context. But God is not going to be here to tell you, oh, by the way, you could do this. No, search up the treasures for yourself and find out what God permits and what he doesn't permit. And if you don't do that, then you would make yourself miserable with pains that God hasn't even demanded and required of you. So, yeah, that's a tangent off of what I was studying. The thing I'm studying, right, I'm not going to talk about that, but I'm on a different topic. But this is just a side point that I guess stumbled upon that I thought I would share. All right, y'all. Peace. Okay, now I've got to add this, and excuse the noise in the background if there is any. Now, of course, I know there are going to be those who say, okay, see, this guy's wrong because the New Testament says you gotta suffer. You gotta be a slave for Christ. Do not store up treasures for yourself on earth, but store up treasures in heaven where moth and dust, right, does not consume, right? And of course, the whole New Testament message is that because you're going to heaven, forget about the earth because you're going to heaven, right? Now, I don't want this video to be too long, but let me help you understand why there are those who will suffer unnecessarily and get the same reward as those who did not suffer because they did not need to suffer. Okay? In Matthew chapter 5, verse 5 and verse 10. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 5 and verse 10. In verse 5, Christ says, happy are the meek because they will inherit the earth. The meek, right? In verse 10, he says, happy are those who are persecuted, right? In other words, those who suffer, right? In other words, those who go through misery, who are miserable, who are persecuted, we do know what persecution is, right? Why? Happy are they. Why? Because they will inherit heaven. Now, you see, I don't know what it is with Christians today. I mean, I really want to use the word to describe them, but let me not, because they belong to Christ. We all belong to Christ, and I'm not going to cast judgment. But oh my goodness, what is wrong with Christians? What is wrong with humanity today? Everybody want to skip verse 5 of what our master Yeshua said, and they want to go straight to verse 10, where it says that those who are persecuted will inherit heaven. Right. So automatically now what Christ said in verse 5 about people inheriting the earth, that doesn't apply to anybody. Right? That doesn't apply to any Christian, right? All Christians will go to heaven. Right? But Christ said, happy are the meek because they will inherit earth. There are people who will not go to heaven, people. There are Christians who will not go to heaven. And there are some who will go to heaven. What is the prerequisite to go to heaven? You must be persecuted. You can't just be some good, righteous person who lived the earth, never went through a day of trial, never went through the fire. The devil never put you through the fire. You weren't persecuted for the sake of the good news. But now because you died, you going to heaven? You do know that when you go to heaven, you will be given incorruption. You will be given immortality. As a matter of fact, you cannot die. You know angels can die. They can be killed. They can be destroyed. Those going to heaven will never die. In fact, they cannot be killed. This is what Paul says. And they will judge angels. And they will rule with Christ on his throne as he rules with his God and Father on his throne. And they will be given new names, just as Christ was giving a new name. Why? Because they are conquerors. Conquerors of what? Conquerors of death. This is all in the book of Revelation. Christ says, to each one who conquers, I will give them a new name. And I will give them some of the hidden manna in heaven. Right? And they will each be given a new name that nobody else knows, just as I was given a new name that nobody else knows. And they will sit with me on my throne as I sit with my God and Father on his throne. That tells you something, which I'm not going to get into. But anyway, that tells you, okay, that in order to go to heaven, you got to go through the fire. As Christ told Peter, the devil has demanded to sift you as wheat. Peter was part of the anointed. He's going to heaven. Peter can't just be regular person who dies. No, Peter's not going to be on the earth. So he can't just, it's not good enough for Peter to just be a meek person, live a regular life and die. No, Peter has to be persecuted so that he can inherit heaven. Matthew chapter 5, verse 10. But for you and I, if I die tonight, right, and I haven't gone through any persecution, I haven't. That's the honest truth, right? But if I'm to slave for Christ doesn't mean you're persecuted. To slave for Christ just means you're doing Christ's will. Okay, so me preaching to you, this is part of Christ's will. I'm not suffering. I'm not being persecuted. So if a person like me is deemed righteous and God judges me as righteous and I die today, I'm going to be resurrected to paradise. I'm not going to heaven because I don't fit the description of those going to heaven because I haven't been persecuted. I have not been persecuted a day in my life. What am I doing going to heaven? People, come on now. Okay, so again, if you want to misinterpret scriptures and be a fool and think that you have to go through the fire just to go to paradise, well then go ahead and do that. But Christ is going to tell you, right? Like the man who, like the parable Christ gave about a man who worked all day, right? And then another person came and he only worked for an hour in the day. And then let's say I worked all day, right? And Christ and my arrangement with Christ was that I will get $100, right? For working for Christ. And then Christ says, okay, fine. So begin working, right? And then now is nighttime. I've worked all day and somebody else comes at night, okay, the last hour, and he arranges with Christ, and Christ says, I'm going to give you $100. And the guy says, okay. And then he works 1 hour and he gets the same wage that I got. You know what Christ is going to tell me? Now I'm in the parable, me, for example, I have a problem with Christ about that because I tell Christ, hey, like, yo, my man's like, I've been working all day, but you gave me only $100. You're giving him the same wage that you gave me, and he came in at the last hour. He only worked for 1 hour. Christ is going to tell me, as he said in the parable, well, my man's like, you agreed that I will pay you 100, right? And I'll say, yeah. Well, did I give you your 100 or not? Yeah, you gave me my 100. Okay, so what's the problem? Of what business is it? This is what Christ says. Of what business is it to you if I give him $100 and I give you 100? It doesn't matter what I gave him. Mind your own business and matter. Think about what I gave you. If I was short in what I paid you, okay, then have a problem with me. But if we agreed, if this was the arrangement, if this was a signed document that this is what I'm gonna give you, which is everlasting life in paradise, and somebody else comes, he didn't suffer like you suffered, right? He lived a good life. He preached too. He was my slave. He preached, right? But he also, you know, pursued his desires, right? And he came in at the last hour, and he's gonna get, everlasting life too, just like you. Of what business is that to you? That's your problem. That's not his problem, and that's not my problem. This is basically the principle of that parable. So again, let me end it here. I don't want this audio to be too long because people probably not gonna watch it. So peace, y'all.